Whoopsie.
Turns out that it's not just woke activists saying that ICE and Border Patrol are nothing more than lawless thugs. It's also federal judges, multiple federal judges, who recently roasted ICE, DHS, and Border Patrol for their lies, their abuse of immigrants, their ignoring of court orders and people's due process rights, and basically running what amounts to a fascist shadow police force on U.S. soil. And while these agencies are sitting here screaming, oh, don't understand, we're following the law, the law. They've actually helped funnel over 600 immigrant children into federal detention centers this year. So here's the big picture. Federal judges are finally done pretending that DHS, ICE, and Border Patrol are acting in good faith. They're not. We've got rulings calling them out for lying to the court, which is, illegal, hiding evidence, breaking consent decrees, and abusing people in their custody. And at the exact same time, reports show that ICE has already sent around 600 immigrant kids to federal detention centers this year alone. But sure, tell me again how we care about the children, how we're protecting the children, and how we are a nation of laws. Because apparently we're not. One of the most recent rulings is 200 pages. And the judge spends most of it doing what journalists and activists have been screaming about, calling ICE, DHS, and Border Patrol the liars that they are. Not misinformed, not confused. No. Straight up liars. Okay, we're talking about agents giving contradictory stories under oath, evidence being lost or misplaced whenever it makes ICE look bad. I mean, think about the hours and hours of footage that apparently was lost, okay, that ICE just can't seem to find. Oh, computer crash, what are you going to do? Policies being enforced that the agencies pretend do not exist when they end up having to defend it in court. So now, as a result of all this, judges are saying, you've got no credibility here. None. Based on all of this, you don't have any. And this matters because usually the courts tend to bend over backwards and assume that federal agencies are acting in good faith. But in this case, no, because if a judge is willing to write hundreds of pages documenting lies, it means the mask has finally been lifted. This is not an example of a few bad apples in law enforcement. No, this is basically calling out the entire institution. You had another federal judge that looked at conditions at a ICE detention facility and said, in judge speak, that this looks like a prison that you would find in a third world dictatorship. We're talking about people crammed into filthy, freezing cells without access to medical care, who are beaten and are in constant fear of retaliation. And there is absolutely no transparency whatsoever. These are people who have not been tried and convicted of anything. They're innocent people. Most of them happen to be asylum seekers or people who might have overstayed their visas, which is like a misdemeanor, okay? People who've had issues with their paperwork and literally just caught up in a system that treats existing while not being white and not being a citizen as a crime. It's not. Again, misdemeanor at most, but they're treating it as if it's some sort of felony, okay? So that the judge is now going after these agencies for violating earlier agreements and how they're supposed to treat people. ICE had signed documents promising to uphold certain standards. Of course, they didn't. They just ignored them the second the cameras and the lawyers weren't looking. This is a lawless organization, lawless on purpose. And then we've got these mass enforcement actions. You got these big flashy operations in places like Chicago with, tough names, which are only meant to look good for the cameras on Fox News. But behind this branding is complete and total chaos and illegality. In fact, a federal court in Chicago had to order ICE to release people because the agency was conducting arrests in violation of existing court orders and consent decrees. Advocates say that communities have been traumatized by these violent raids, people deported so fast they never even had time to see a lawyer, so violating their due process rights, and families that were separated permanently because their mom or dad was disappeared by ICE and shipped to another country. Federal judges, as a result, are saying, you violated what we already told you not to do, okay? You don't get to just make things up as you go along. That's not how the law is supposed to work. Courts set the rules. Agencies have to follow them. Courts also have to make sure that the rules that were passed by the legislatures, for example, and legislatures haven't been getting involved in this all that much, and Congress ain't passing no laws, okay? So these courts have to decide, hey, are you actually following the laws that are set out? And overwhelmingly, they're finding that ICE and Border Patrol are not. And Border Patrol is even more ruthless than ICE is. But of course, here's the thing. This administration, and it comes from the top, are treating court orders like they're polite suggestions. That's not the way it's supposed to be. They're only following the law, you know, when people are paying attention, okay? So now let's talk about the kids. While all this is happening, reports show that just in the first part of 2025, ICE sent around 600 immigrant kids into federal detention. These are children that have been separated from their families. They're doing the family separation again. I mean, they did it the first Trump administration. Now they're doing it again. These kids end up getting stuck in bureaucratic mazes and treated as unaccompanied because our system separated them or had detained their parents. Look, there are supposed to be legal protections for children, like the 20-day limit on holding kids in these facilities, and yet here we are again. We're seeing kids being held for a lot longer than they should be. Families that are terrified are in limbo. And you have a system that treats these children not as human beings, but a number, a case file. Let's call this what it is, okay? It is fascism. Look, at the end of the day, you've got a set of agencies that are lying to the courts, ignoring consent decrees, abusing the people in their custody, in their care, funneling these children, young kids, babies, toddlers into detention centers away from their parents, and then are screaming about we're respecting the rule of law while actively shredding it. I mean, this is exactly how authoritarian security forces tend to operate. You create a class of people, immigrants, asylum seekers, whatever, who end up getting treated as less than human. You give unaccountable agents power over them with no oversight. You normalize cruelty at the border so that you can expand it everywhere else. And if you can get people to accept cages and abuse for illegal immigrants, then it's a lot easier to sell that same treatment for prisoners, political opponents, and, well, or protesters, and anyone else the regime doesn't like. We've already seen it happen. Border Patrol being used against protesters. Fusion of national security with basic political control. Right-wing politicians fantasizing about mass deportation, giant camps, and taking the gloves off. Okay? This is the test run for being even more extreme and authoritarian. And look, for years, DHS and ICE assumed they'd get away with everything because Democrats are scared of looking soft on immigration, while Republicans are openly cheering on this brutality, while courts would defer to the magical words of, oh, national security. Well, when judges start filing 200-plus page reports about your lies and abuses, that's the system fighting back the way that it's supposed to. Look, these organizations, these agencies, messed around with the law so recklessly that even the judges, the legal system, who usually bends over backwards for law enforcement agencies, are done. They're done covering. Is this enough? No, not yet. But there are cracks in the facade. Cracks that organizers, lawyers, and communities are using in order to push back. And it proves what immigrants, activists, and abolitionists have been saying for years, that these agencies are not just making a few mistakes here and there, they are acting as, well, with impunity, as lawless agencies. So where does that leave us today? Well, we've got federal judges publicly documenting that ICE, Border Patrol are lying and breaking the law. We've got detention centers that are looking like prisons from authoritarian states. We have 600 children already pulled into these detention centers this year and separated from their families. And we've got the political elites, especially Republicans, but there are some Democrats too, who are defending this machine. If you want that to change, it's not going to happen by politely asking ICE to be nicer and to follow the law. No, that happens by exposing every single time that this happens. Pushing for real cuts to these agencies' budgets and powers. In fact, I would say abolish ICE. We got to get rid of it. And supporting immigrant rights groups, legal defense funds, and organizing for the abolishment of some of these agencies. Again, Department of Homeland Security didn't really need it. Created after the 2001 attacks. Okay, and so, yeah, the terrorist attacks. We don't need it, though. We don't need it. We don't need ICE. And finally, we need to stop letting this so-called law and order propaganda cover up what is really, in effect, state-sponsored violence. If this video helped you cut through the BS and see what is really happening, then smash that like button. Every single like pushes back against the right-wing propaganda machine. I can't do this work without your support. So please check out my Patreon. Link is in the description of this video. For a few bucks a month, you can help keep this channel independent from corporate BS. So hit subscribe, hit that notification bell, and let's keep fighting for democracy and against fascism together.